Hello, everybody. Welcome in to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022, and I'm your host, George Kerth, here joined by the one and only Cody Roadcap. Cody, I know you're probably feeling a couple mixed emotions from free agency, but overall, how you doing here today?
Mixed emotions. That was a better way to describe it than how I was, so I'm just going to steal it. Mixed emotions. It's been an up and down week since we last talked.
Yes, it has, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we move on with the show and we talk about some free agency reactions and hit some other NFL news and notes on the week. It was a busy news week, whether it was signing free agents, making trades, whatever it is. So we got a busy episode ahead of us, Cody. We can keep it moving. Make sure you check us out on the couchgms.com and our social media channels. We're keeping you up to date with every single news in free agency on the couchgms.com on our blog. And check out our Twitter where we're sending you every big story inside and outside of free agency. Really, we're sending you some trade stuff on there as well. Cody, let's just jump right in NFL news. And obviously, I think the first news story has to be the big quarterback trade news out of Cleveland. Cody, Case Keenum was traded to the Buffalo Bills for a seventh round pick. Huge news. What's your reaction?
What are they doing in Buffalo? They have Josh Allen. He's not going anywhere, obviously, but they also signed Matt Barkley. So maybe a quarterback two competition heating up. It doesn't
Yeah.
get any wilder than Case Keenum to the Bills for our news segment.
Oh, yeah, totally. Great start there. But in reality, the big trade news at the quarterback position in Cleveland, Deshaun Watson is headed to Cleveland. I'll break down the trade here for you. The Browns do receive Deshaun Watson and a sixth round pick in 2024. Houston getting back 3 first round picks, number 13 this year, a 2023 and a 2024 first, as well as a fourth round pick this year, a third round pick in 2023, and a fourth round pick in 2024. I feel like Houston has not picked in the first round in about 700 years. The only team that's maybe been longer has been the Rams, but now they're going to have 2 first round picks for the next 3 years unless a trade goes down. And Deshaun Watson finally goes to a team to have a fresh start with a fully guaranteed contract.
I think that's the part that surprises me the most from this whole deal was the fully guaranteed contract. I know we're not going to get too deep into the weeds of his legal background, and that's just one because I don't feel qualified enough to talk about it because there's so much inner workings that I don't know. There's a lot of people covering that are better than me, so I encourage you to go out and hear but everything. But to my understanding, there is still the 22 civil lawsuits that have to be underway. The NFL hasn't completed their investigation, so this guy could still end up missing time. Uh, and they're pretty serious allegations against him. So to go ahead and throw 230 million guaranteed and then also work his salary so that the first year the base is super low. So if he was suspended, he only loses about $50,000 a game. Like there's just some like shadiness and it's like very Cleveland-esque. Like don't get me wrong. Like this trade value would be perfect or is not an not an overpay for a guy of Deshaun Watson's play on the field. But with the excessive amount of baggage that he currently has, and again, not, claiming him to be guilty, I'm not claiming him to be innocent. They have to finish the civil lawsuits. I know he was cleared by the grand jury for the legal or for the criminal charges, so it would just be civil lawsuits at this point. But still, there's a lot of uncertainty. He might not even play this year. He might, miss a half of the season. And then also to oust Baker Mayfield, who I think we often forget. He played with 2 torn labrums in both his shoulders this past year. And in 2020, right? Yeah, 2020. I get 2020 and 2021. Like, I feel like it's all 1 year. So I get those dates confused all the time. But in 2020, he finished top 10 in the league in QBR. So, like, he was still a top quarterback in the league. And we're just, like, forgetting how good he was. They weren't going to trade him. Now they're willing to trade him, but nobody wants him at this point because all the quarterback markets are dried up. So they might end up cutting Baker Mayfield. And it just feels like this is an overreaction for a team that has spent so long trying to find a quarterback. And in all reality, they had one in Baker Mayfield who literally put everything he had on the line to try to get them back to the playoffs after making it in 2020. And they turn around and give Deshaun Watson not only a huge contract, but they literally sacrificed 3 years of their future picks. It's only the second time in the NFL that a player's been traded for 3 first-round picks alone. I know if you wanna count, like, Trey Lance, he was technically traded for 3 first-round picks, but it was more of a pick swap in the first year with Miami and, um, San Fran, so last year. So only Herschel Walker and Deshaun Watson had been traded for 3 first-round picks outright.
It was definitely a steep price tag, not only in the trade market, but out of their wallets as well. I think the contract is the biggest thing that gets me as well. I don't quite understand how you can fully guarantee a contract to a guy with his background. I mean, if you saw a fully guaranteed contract go to an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady, I think that is more of a, of an investment I would understand. But going to this, it seems like that was just the Browns' plan too. We're going to definitely make sure Deshaun Watson wants to come here because we're going to make sure he guarantee his money. And we're going to work the numbers around to make it so he's not going to lose much money in the first year. When I think inevitably he is going to be suspended for a certain amount of time. We don't know that amount of time yet. So I think that was literally just their way to win the sweepstakes. And I agree that the short end of the straw is definitely Baker Mayfield. He should go somewhere else and earn a starting job outright. And we just don't know if it's going to be this year, or at least maybe not in the trade market. Maybe he'll be a free agent going somewhere because, yes, there's been so much movement already. But there are a lot of people down on Baker Mayfield. Maybe I've been critical of him in these last few weeks as well, because I've mentioned the whole Odell Beckham situation where, oh, we saw him go somewhere and, be without Baker and look better. But there's no doubting that he is definitely a top 32 starting quarterback in this league. He is somebody who you can build a franchise around. The Browns just jumped off the ship after one bad year with all those injuries, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and that's tough, especially for Baker Mayfield, and be interested where he ends up. But turning this back to the fantasy side of it, now that they have Deshaun Watson, I think that might give an uptick to. Again, this is if he plays, he could miss 8 games, he could miss the whole season. But for this exercise, for this thought process, as of right now, we're expecting him to play majority of the season. Uh, how does that with Deshaun Watson versus Baker Mayfield? How about guys like Donovan People-Jones? Is he now a late round flyer? Do you have Amari Cooper, back in the wide receiver 1 tier? Like, what are your thoughts on their outside weapons?
Let's assume for this exercise, Deshaun Watson is going to play the full year, because we'll probably have clarity before draft season on if he's going to play the full year, if he's going to miss a certain amount of games. If he's going to play the full year, yes, I think Amari Cooper definitely does stay around that wide receiver 1 territory. We already know he's been a successful receiver with quarterbacks that are not even quite as talented as Deshaun Watson. We obviously don't know if there's going to be some rust to knock off from him after not playing in a season, but he was definitely one of the more talented quarterbacks in the league when he was playing for Houston. So that wide receiver 1 definitely gets an uptick. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I'm not completely convinced he is going to be an absolute difference maker. Late round flyer, maybe a good spot for him, because there's always going to be guys that are taken that I think are just, really not worth it, or you're going to drop them before week 1 anyway. Donovan Peoples-Jones can fall into that category. If you hold him for week 1 and he busts, you drop him, it's fine. And then on the running back side, I hope this doesn't mean they're going to become more of a pass happy offense and take away a couple of carries from them, because we obviously know the split backfield's already sketchy territory. Both Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt were good because they were getting such workload. If they keep getting similar amount of carries, I don't think you have to move either of them anywhere down your board, but it's something worth noting and maybe being aware of, especially Kareem Hunt going into draft season, because it could be a completely different offense.
Yeah, that is a very good point. I actually thought Kareem Hunt was going to be a part of the trade. I'm not going to lie, because I know it was originally reported they wanted players and picks. Houston has had a running back problem. They tendered Dearness Johnson. So I was like, okay, Kareem Hunt makes sense as a player that could go to Houston and, maybe he would thrive. But he's still in Cleveland. There's definitely a lot to work out on. It's also worth noting that both Jarvis Landry is willing to come back to Cleveland now after the trade. And also Will Fuller has some interest in joining the Browns, who has played with Deshaun Watson. So those would be some good names that will definitely rule out Donovan Peoples-Jones if that happens during the draft season. But we'll keep you all updated on the Brown situation. But it wasn't just one quarterback traded. We had multiple quarterbacks traded. And Matt Ryan, the Atlanta Falcons obviously lost out on Deshaun Watson. They were one of the finalist teams. They were expected to be the finalists until literally the last second. Was almost like they were up 28-3. I know you've seen those memes going around. But Matt Ryan was traded to the Indianapolis Colts for a third round pick. So so I don't know what to take away with this one. I'll let you talk about it, but just as you think about your thoughts, the Atlanta Falcons got more out of Mohamed Sanu than they did Atlanta Matt Ryan.
Also, it's worth noting that Matt Ryan has more dead cap now on the Falcons roster. I believe it's $40-ish million.
It's just
That's
over 40.
more. Yeah, it's more dead cap than any player in NFL history. And that's coming off of a year where Carson Wentz for the Eagles had like 32 million in dead cap or something like that. Like 40 million in cap that the Falcons cannot use this year just because they traded away Matt Ryan. But I texted you and Tyler actually right as this trade happened and said, am I dumb for thinking that this is a stupid trade for Indianapolis? And I've seen a lot of people come out and defend Indianapolis because they think he's a great stopgap quarterback. But that exactly right there is why I think it's a dumb trade for the Colts, because they were criticizing Carson Wentz and wanting to move on because they were tired of band-aiding the position. So then they go out and get an older quarterback near the end of his career to band-aid the position. Now, I understand they didn't really give up anything. The third round pick is one of the picks that they traded Carson Wentz. When they traded Carson Wentz, they got. So they ended up coming out basically trading Carson Wentz for Matt Ryan and getting an extra pick out of it too. But it doesn't make sense to me why they would think Matt Ryan's an upgrade from Carson Wentz when they're talking about trying to find a long-term answer. Ryan is not the long-term answer at his age.
No, he's definitely not the long-term answer. But I think, hey, I know this. I didn't really know how to answer this question in our group chat, so we can talk it out here. I know Tyler's not here with us, but I'm like torn. Like the move to me is just like a meh. Like it doesn't really move the needle. Maybe they get a little bit better because he's a little bit more conservative with the ball. He won't have as many turnovers. He's been pretty healthy throughout his career. He doesn't really put himself in danger, which we've seen Carson Wentz do. I mean, the dude Carson Wentz did sprained both his ankles on the same play at one game last year, so he's not as injury prone. And they just want the game manager. Like honestly, it feels very much like end of the career Alex Smith. Like he wasn't going to blow you away, but he was going to do enough to keep you in every game. And with that defense and with that running game, there is definitely they could use some weapons on the outside. I know there's a lot of, Indianapolis fans on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, all those. They're like, Matt, go recruit Julio Jones. Like bring Julio back, like get him a top guy. Maybe they'll look into bringing T.Y. Hilton back as another option. Like they still need some pieces. But I do think, in a sense of like, okay, if you don't like the quarterbacks in this draft class, I get it. You know, to me, I still think it would have made more sense to go get a Baker Mayfield, even though you'd have to pay him eventually. Like, give me a year of Baker Mayfield, see how he does. I mean, they were one of the teams that were reported interested in Jordan Love in the draft a few years ago. Jordan Love is the same age as all the rookie quarterbacks this year. They could have probably got him. It would probably would have cost more than a third round pick. So I think you have to remember the third round pick aspect of it is what they had to give up. I think it's like a safe trade, but it doesn't move the needle for me. Like I don't think the Colts are, you know, I don't think this makes the Colts like 4 games better on their win total or anything like that. Like maybe he wins, 1 or 2 more games than Carson Wentz would have because of not throwing an interception. But at the same
And not losing to the Jags.
But the Colts still have some things to figure out, and it's also at the end of the day, it's just like another NFC team quarterback going to the AFC and making that conference as a whole so much more tougher.
It honestly, I'm sure they could probably name, like if you put like a first tier, like a quarter of quarterbacks, you'd probably have 10 AFC quarterbacks to like 4 NFC quarterbacks at this point. It's like it's that lopsided at this point. I'm just hypothetically speaking, but yeah, it is another solid quarterback going over to the AFC. And because of that, you're saying it doesn't really move the needle. You know that the AFC is a gauntlet now this year. Was there a point in trading for a guy for the short term? or would it have made more sense to go for that guy who'd be more of a long-term option? Because you're not going to most likely compete for a championship, not only with Matt Ryan, but in the AFC for the next few years.
I see.
Is
I
it
think
almost make more sense to retool at this point with how they were talking?
no. I think the Colts think they can win, and this is
With
where I
Matt
think.
Ryan.
Yes, I think the Colts think they can win with Matt Ryan. They were literally a game away with Carson Wentz last year. They were in the playoffs the year before that with Phillip Rivers. Like, I know they didn't make the playoffs because they lost to the Jags in the last game of the season, and everybody is like, oh, they lost to the Jags. But if you think 3 weeks prior to that, the Colts were the team that nobody wanted to face. Nobody was like, hey, we don't want to play the Colts. They're playing really good football right now, and then their last 2 weeks they completely fell apart. So again, that could be coaching and stuff like that. But this is a talented roster. They still have a top defense. They have. We could argue back and forth all day who's the best running back in football. Is it Jonathan Taylor or Derrick Henry? It's 1A and 1B. Let's not make they have the best running back. And Matt Ryan, he is still a quality quarterback. He's not, the difference maker. He's not the MVP that he once was, but in a Frank Wright system that's very quarterback friendly, play action game, hand it off, quick and easy routes. He makes the right decisions. Again, like I think this is Alex Smith. He got the Washington football team to the playoffs. He got the Kansas City Chiefs to the playoffs in his late career. Like I think it's a great move, and he's going to be there for 2 years because they guaranteed the second year of his salary. So maybe then after this year or next year, if it's not how it's working out, he becomes the true transition quarterback like Alex Smith was in Kansas City. They make a splash trade. But for now, like I think they can compete. And I understand the AFC is a gauntlet, but they literally just have the Titans who they send to have their number. They can't be the Jacksonville Jaguars, but they always compete hard with the Titans and you just have to get in. 7 teams make it. The AFC West is going to beat themselves up. How many teams of that will really end up making it? Like, I don't think they're like a guaranteed lock for the playoffs, but I don't think that they're like, I think they're a wild card team or they'll make it because they win their division.
I see. So I'm just gonna have to agree to disagree with you. I almost feel like they'd be better off handling this season like their year pre Andrew Luck because of the way the AFC is breaking out, and because I don't see Matt Ryan dueling up against a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen and winning in the playoffs to get even to the Super Bowl. So I almost think it's better off if they had a first round pick this year and they would have had a chance to draft a rookie to sit behind Matt Ryan, at least a first round rookie to sit behind Matt Ryan. I think it would have been a better move. But obviously that pick is the Eagles pick. So because of that, I think they would have been better off trying to not I don't even know if I want to say tank it, retool it, try to get a top 10 pick next year and get that guy that could be the 2-3 years down the road guy that can duel with Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen to get into the Super Bowl.
I got you. I mean, that's definitely one way to look at it. But again, I'll spin it back to fantasy before we move on. Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor. We said the trade didn't really move the needle. I don't think that at this point, Matt Ryan versus Carson Wentz, like maybe there's a slight uptick for Michael Pittman, but I think he's still about the same spot. And like I mentioned, Jonathan Taylor, he's drafted first or second overall, depending if you want him or Henry in the upcoming drafts.
Definitely. I think I'm more interested to see what wide receiver 2 is going to look like for Indianapolis. Like if they do get a Julio Jones or bring back a T.Y. Hilton. I'm a little bit worried about Michael Pittman being the only weapon, especially because Zach Pascal is now officially out of town. He signed with the Eagles.
Oh, just had to throw a little like Eagles support and love in there. But we can't throw support and love into the Packers because last Thursday, breaking the internet, I was playing a Madden game in our connected franchise, and I literally practically stopped playing. I couldn't even focus on the game, end up losing. But Devontae Adams was traded to the Las Vegas Raiders for a first and a second round pick. And I'm just going to talk because it's my team, and George wants to hear what I have to say anyway. So,
Yes,
and
I
hopefully
do.
you do too. This move for me was heartbreaking. I've spent years. I'll admit I was a part of the drop Vontae. But I was never on like cut him. I just called him drop Vontae. I was like, give him a chance. Like he looked good. He finally turned around. I was in the Philadelphia Eagles, when they started to run the table and he caught the no-look pass, like, I saw his career ascend. I saw him still have 12 touchdowns the year Brett Hundley played most of the snaps because Aaron Rodgers went down. I've fought for years that he's the best wide receiver in the league, and I still think that. Uh, he made a big impact on the Green Bay, on me as a fan. One of my favorite players ever in the green and gold over his 8-year career. So it was tough. It was a heartbreaking move. But this is one of those trades where I do think both teams are going to come out okay. And both teams, it's a win-win trade. So the Packers get the first and the second round pick, and they didn't have to pay the largest non-quarterback contract to a player that turns 30 this season. Now, granted, some will say 30 is still young in the NFL for wide receivers. Carson Palmer took over for in the Arizona Cardinals when Larry Fitzgerald was 32 and he had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. I get that. And I don't think Davante Adams is slowing down anytime soon. But when you look at a guy we talked about last week, Amari Cooper, going for a 5th-round pick and $20 million that they had to take on, and remember the Packers had a terrible cap situation, they essentially got $20 million in cap space and was able to get a first and a second round pick. So they now have 4 picks in the top 60. So that's pretty good for a team that was, Super Bowl favorites last year. Again, it doesn't make our team better by any means. And then the last part, there's 2 other, small subjects about the trade. If you look back at the playoff game, obviously the big thing that everyone's going to say we lost on was because special teams. We're working on fixing that. But then some people say in that second half, Aaron Rodgers zoned in on Davante Adams, and he took away from finding open guys, and they were trying to make it work. And it's worth noting that the Packers are undefeated in the 7 games that Adams has missed. Or I'm sorry, 8 games Adams has missed in the Matt LaFleur era. So the Packers are undefeated without Davante Adams. That had to play a role into it. And then legacy, I think, is a big factor to it. I also listened to his press conference. It was more about getting to play on the West Coast where he's from. Like, his grandparents have never been able to make the trip to Green Bay. Now it's like a couple-hour car ride from where they live to Las Vegas. So hopefully his grandparents will finally get to see him play in the NFL. So, like, that was a big aspect of this trade. But this is a guy that's on the brink of being a Hall of Famer, and now he gets out of Aaron Rodgers' shadow. Some people will always say, well, Davante Adams is only good because of Aaron Rodgers. And we'll get to find out now because he's playing with Derek Carr, who was his college quarterback. They're best friends. They talked every day or multiple times a week, even when they were on different teams, just about life, because that's how good of friends they are. But now he gets out of Aaron Rodgers' shadow. He has a chance to go help another team. So I think it's good for Davante. I think it's good for the Raiders, and I think it's good for the Packers. But as a Packers fan, definitely heartbroken.
I think this was the most interesting trade of the group, mostly because Rodgers agreed to come back to Green Bay, and you have to think he had to have an inkling that Davante Adams was not going to be there. We know that Davante Adams originally was saying he wanted to follow Aaron Rodgers if he ended up going to another team. So very interesting now that Rodgers comes back and Davante Adams goes out. I know this was a dream landing spot for him, and it is good to see that he could go and play for Las Vegas with his friend and whatever it is. But when you have someone like Aaron Rodgers coming back, he's only got a couple of years left. He almost retired this year even. And now you get rid of your top offensive weapon instead of building weapons around that offensive weapon. I don't know exactly what the Packers thought process is. Maybe part of it has to do with the fact that you said like the Packers are 8-0 without Davante Adams in the lineup. Maybe they're actually going to finally draft Aaron Rodgers a first-round wide receiver, which they have not done in his entire career. Now they have 2 first-round picks. But there's something the Packers have to do something. Bring in a veteran wide receiver like an Odell Beckham. Make that high draft pick wide receiver. Something to put something around Aaron Rodgers to give him hope to win that title he has been missing for how many years in his last 2-3 seasons here. So I feel like it's not done. I don't think the Packers are going to settle after that, but I don't know what kind of move they're going to make.
I'll give you 2 names I've heard some rumblings about. One was the guy we're going to talk about next that's already been traded, so I'll leave him off and I'll tease you for who we're going to talk about next. But the 2 wide receivers in Seattle, Tyler Lockett
Hmm.
and DK Metcalf. Now, obviously they will come at different costs, but it'll be interesting to see as we progress through this offseason what is Seattle's main intentions? If they go out and get a Baker Mayfield, the deal might not be as likely, but there has been some rumblings. DK is not happy. Tyler Lockett, he's getting up there in age. He could be a good fit for them. So to keep an eye on those two guys in trades. I know there's been some connections with Matt LaFleur and Julio Jones. If you want to take a risk on that, they can rekindle some magic. I know he has struggled the last 2 years to stay healthy, but besides that, he was pretty healthy the rest of his career. So they might take a flyer. They're definitely going to do this move. They're definitely going to add some pieces at wide receiver, but they still have solid receivers. They just don't have that alpha dog anymore. Like Alan Lazard's still good. Randall Cobb is still a decent receiver. He has the connection with Rodgers, and MVS, he's still out there. He might eventually come back to Green Bay. I know there's some reported interest there. So there's still definitely a lot to wait and see. I don't think in terms of fantasy, like Devontae Adams for me, even though he goes to a different team, he's still, wide receiver 1 or 2. Like I still think he's
Mhm.
going to put up a bunch of numbers. I would have took if he was with Rodgers, I would have still taken him over Cooper Cup. You could say it's because I'm a fan. I still might take him over Cooper Cup just because Cooper Cup season was so spectacular last year. They just signed Allen Robinson. I might have to bring him down, but he's still 1-2 out there. And honestly, until we see how it goes, whether there's not a number one in Green Bay that I feel confident in starting in fantasy. And that's the biggest question mark, heading into draft season as you start to look or building your dynasty teams. And like, do you hold on to a Randall Cobb if you have him in dynasty or if he was set to be a free? Do you go out and sign an Alan Lazard, or is he really worth a roster spot? Because he'll have, some games with 5 catches and a touchdowns and other games with no targets. Like, I think this will be a very multiple offense. I think the running backs, AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones, are the two guys to own in Green Bay at the moment. But there's still a lot of questions out there. And it does appear that though this move did help them on the defensive front. So they were able to bring back Rasul Douglas. They were able to add Jerron Reed. So they've been adding some guys on the defensive side. So maybe they're going to try to win it with defense because we saw how suffocating it was in the playoffs last year. Run game and then passing game, the third option.
I think fantasy wise, the question is not as much about Devontae Adams, but I think it comes down to two other Raiders. First is Derek Carr. How much of a boost does this give Derek Carr? While I think people are going to start over drafting him, I probably would put him near that. Like, if you're going to wait on a quarterback and be the last person in your league to take one, he might be a guy you take as your backup. Because I know there's a lot of situations last year where I was the last person in our league to take a quarterback. I'd take Jalen Hurts, paired him with Joe Burrow, and that worked. So maybe you take whoever ends up being that 8, 9, 10 quarterback and pair him with Derek Carr and see what happens. Like, I don't think there's going to be a lot of fantasy value out of Derek Carr, but he could be a guy who could spot start for you in a good matchup. So there's a slight boost.
No,
But
I mean,
Hunter Renfrow,
yeah, that's a tough one. I'll even give you another name, Darren Waller. I mean,
that's true too.
tight ends are miserable right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with the addition of Devontae Adams, Darren Waller is, I think it's a top 2. Like I know, you have Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, you have Debo and Kittle. So, you think why not Waller and Adams? But I think because the guy you just mentioned, Hunter Renfrow, they have a connection. Like I think he'll eat into those. So Darren Waller drops a little bit. I do
I
like the
wouldn't drop him more past like 4. Like, I think it's Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and then Darren Waller still. But I don't think there's any chance of him breaking that top 3 right now with that situation.
Yeah, and like now Darren Waller to me, like he'd probably be exactly what you said, number 4.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a lot closer to TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts than he is
Mm-hmm.
in my mind with the Devon.
Yeah, tier 1 got a boost.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, hey, this might be the first year I take a tight end in the first 2 rounds because they've just been so rough. But back to your question about Derek Carr, I do think if he's not overdrafted, like I don't want to see like a big, I'm not taking him early, but when you get down to those guys, or like when you were around, you were taking Justin Herbert last year, rounds 10 and beyond, like Derek Carr finished second in 2020 in passing yards. Like he was airing it out. Now he gets, the best receiver in football. I'll still call Devontae Adams the best receiver in football, a guy that he has the connection with. He's going to put up points. He's going to score touchdowns. Like I do think he is a solid option if you miss out on the first couple tiers. But he does lack the rushing ability, which is the fantasy cheat code. But honestly, I'll go ahead and say it. where the standings are right now, I would take Derek Carr over Aaron Rodgers for fantasy.
Whoa. I mean, I'm sure Aaron Rodgers is going to fall down the boards from where he was last year. He was still taken as like QB5 last year. It's not going to be the case this year, but that's still bold to me.
Yeah, like I said, now if we go out and sign DK Metcalf and draft Chris Olave, George Pickens, and just have okay, I have the right to change that. But as of recording this on March 22nd, my way too early quarterback rankings would have Derek Carr ahead of Aaron Rodgers.
I like the boldness. Now, I did mention the name Hunter Renfrow. We have to talk about it for at least a half a second before we move on to some other wide receiver news. He was a game changer and a savior for a lot of fantasy teams last year. Obviously, he was getting the wide receiver one snaps as soon as you had the whole legal situation with I am totally blanking on the name. Doesn't
Henry
matter.
Ruggs.
Henry Ruggs, thank you. But obviously he's not going to be the wide receiver one there anymore. Does that help him because there's not going to be double coverage on him after that breakout season? Or does it hurt him because there might not be enough to go around to him now? How do you rank him? I don't even know if we already talked about how you'd rank him before the trade, but how do you rank him now after the trade? Like, where would he fall? Wide receiver 2, flex?
He'd be like low end wide receiver 2 flex option. I'm going to compare this to not before last year. Okay. We had the Robert Woods Cooper Cup debate. Well, it's not a debate. It's Devontae Adams. Like, I'm not debating Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow, but I expect them to still both be productive. It's an Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Like, I still would take Justin Jefferson first. Adam Thielen is still a serviceable wide receiver 2 flex option, depending on how deep you are. So I would look at him at those places. I actually really like the Minnesota comp too. Like, Kirk Cousins is an underrated fantasy player. I think Derek Carr can be an underrated fantasy player. Adam Thielen to Hunter Renfrow, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams. Like, that's similar offenses. Like, that is how I view them after this trade.
We'll see. They'll probably end up falling on boards very similar to that. But now I have to ask about a wide receiver and how you'd fall him compared to those comps. And that would be Robert Woods, who was one of the guys that the Packers were thinking about trading for, was traded to the Tennessee Titans for a 2023 sixth round pick. Cheap price tag for a solid wide receiver. He might miss a little bit of time to start the year after he had his knee injury in the middle of last season, but it is expected that he will be back at some point in training camp, so he will not miss games. He's also now number 2 behind A.J. Brown. Do you put Robert Woods similar to the Hunter Renfrow and Adam Thielen spot?
So I would have him a little bit lower than those guys, because one, the Titans are more of a run heavy team behind Derrick Henry. Two, I like Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins to air it out more than Ryan Tannehill. So I would put him lower there. But I do think this is a good fit. You mentioned a 6th round pick. It seems like a super cheap contract or a super cheap deal. Again, this was a big one because of contract. He still owed a lot of money. So, and I think they're tied to him for the next 3 years. He has money coming to him. So there's definitely that. He's coming off the ACL. You have to be a little worried about that. He's turning 30. So definitely when you see the 6th round pick, be like, why didn't my team do it? There is some red flags. But I think this is a great addition for the Titans. Hopefully it works out better than the last. They went after Josh Reynolds, former Ram. He didn't work out for them. Hopefully this Ram does work out for the Titans. And it adds another piece. Hopefully he can stay healthy and he gives them what they wanted Julio to do. The play action game, Henry comes back. But yeah, as of right now, he's a flex option for me. But there might be some guys, some rookies, depending on where they go, that even creep up ahead of him until I see him come off the injury, and I expect more passing yards out of the Titans defense. It's hard for me to really dive deep into, having them support 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers.
This also is a situation where the Titans might not be done. There are some loose rumors that they're tied to a potential Baker Mayfield trade or signing if he gets cut. So we might have to be dealing with a different quarterback other than Ryan Tannehill as well. But that's a wait and see. Who knows if anything's going to happen there.
Absolutely, George. Well, there was those are the 4, I guess we just did 4 big trades. There was definitely some other news and notes about not just free agency, but Matt Stafford, he signed a 4-year extension. DJ Moore, he signed a 3-year extension. Chris Godwin was franchise tag, but ended up signing a 3-year deal. The Bills released Cole Beasley, and I just have to mention this one. I know it has nothing to do with fantasy unless you're in an IDP league, which I do have him in one of my IDP leagues. But Zadarius Smith joins arch rival the Minnesota Vikings after backing out of a deal with the Baltimore Ravens. If you watch us consistently on YouTube, normally know I have a Zadarius Smith jersey hanging up behind me. It's still on the wall, but I turn the lights out because we're in all black as we miss Zadarius Smith and we hate that he went to a rival. But of these big signings or extensions, what is some of your takeaways from them?
Well, obviously, I think the Rams are just going to go all in on trying to repeat a couple of times with Matt Stafford. I don't know if that's actually going to work out for them, but DJ Moore is an interesting one to me. The Panthers were really heavy in the quarterback market. Again, they might also not be done. Maybe they might be in someone for the market for like a Baker Mayfield, but
Well,
DJ Moore decides to hang around.
I was going to
So
say
what?
it was reported, and this is the first time I've ever seen this. It was reported that the Panthers and the Browns have a mutual disinterest in each other. So that one is
Hmm.
definitely not going to be happening. They don't want Baker doesn't want to go there. The Panthers don't want him, so they're going to be rolling with either. I know they were at Malik Willis's pro day, so they could be looking at him in the first round, or they're going to roll another year with Sam Darnold. But DJ Moore, he was a trade candidate for the Packers at one point, like real early, and then he got signed like the next day. Um, so definitely was an interesting name, but he has some talent, and if they get a quarterback in there, I think he could get back to being that fantasy guy that he was 2 years ago.
Now, I also was about to say, although I thought that they might be trying to prime up for something because it did just come out as we were recording this that they also restructured Christian McCaffrey's contract to try to clear up some space. So I didn't know if that was trying to make McCaffrey more available in a potential big trade, or if that was just them trying to make some kind of signing, which I don't know what kind of huge signing they still could make at this point, but
They'll probably end up
that's
trading for
something
Jimmy
interesting.
G.
That is possible as well. That is a name we have not heard much of and have not talked much of since we our first show back. So that's true. That name is still out there.
Absolutely. But as always, we mentioned at the top of the show, make sure you're checking out the couchgms.com. We have a free agent tracker that literally has every free agent signing that we can find or that we hear about. And even those oddball offensive linemen that you might never heard of, they might be a restricted free agent that re-sign. They're on the list. So because we want to, keep you informed, not just about fantasy, but your favorite team, it's all in one place. Just control F your favorite team, and you'll see all the signings that they did. It's a great resource, but there was definitely some big names on that list that we're going to go through real quick, and we have to start with the quarterback positions. Jameis Winston returns to the New Orleans Saints after they missed out on Deshaun Watson, and almost instantly after trading Matt Ryan, Marcus Mariota goes to the Atlanta Falcons. George, which one are you most intrigued by?
Intrigued, Marcus Mariota. I think I've been similar to Tyler, seeing if Mariota would get another shot to start. He's been impressive in the minor little bit of time he's played. I think he kind of got pushed out of Tennessee because there was a lack of weapons around him and not a great system for him. And now he has a chance to create something new down there in Atlanta. I hope it works out for him. But I think the bigger of the two signings is Jameis Winston because people kind of counted out Jameis Winston, I think, after the injury, but they forget that the Saints were playing very well with him before he got hurt. He's now going to have Michael Thomas coming back, hopefully from an injury, from all his surgeries and whatever else happened. We know that they're kind of a mess. They're on a new coach now, but that team should actually be improved on offense compared to last year, as long as Alvin Kamara's situation does not affect them long term.
Yeah, that's a good caveat to put because remember he has his incident from the Pro Bowl. We don't know any more details of that, but it is unlikely that he plays a full season. He'll most likely be suspended for multiple games. But you good point. They were 5-2 before Winston got hurt. The Mariota trade or signing wasn't a trade. So many trades happen. I just think everything's a trade at this point. But honest, like I get it because he used to work with Arthur Smith. But at the same time, I don't get it because Mariota's good enough to win them enough games to get them out of, like a top 8 pick, but he's not good enough to get them to the playoffs with that current roster. So did they just like put themselves in a worse position by going to get, a quarterback that, you know, is just okay? Like maybe I'll be completely surprised. Maybe they did this to go sign a guy, or maybe they'll still draft a quarterback with their first round pick and let Mariota, who already knows the system, come in and be the coach. Like I have to think, or not the coach, but like a guy that can help train
The
him. I have to
bridge.
think that's probably the more likely scenario. But if they don't take a quarterback, this definitely is a very odd situation for me.
Oh yeah, it's also worth noting there is about -5 wide receivers on that roster. They could probably go grab the guy from local Aldi, and he'll be better than the guy that's like number 2 on that wide receiver core. I don't even know if I know any names outside of Zacchaeus, who I still am not even sure if I'm pronouncing his name right.
I'm not even
So
gonna try. Uh, but sometimes you can find those good all these wide receivers, like good old concession man Greg Ward, who is back with the Philadelphia Eagles. But the bigger names at wide receiver that are signed, the two big ones was Allen Robinson, which I mentioned earlier, to the Los Angeles Rams, and Juju Smith-Schuster to the Kansas City Chiefs.
yep,
What are your thoughts?
Juju was interesting. I did not expect Juju to go take a 1-year deal to go try to win a championship, but it sounds like even from his press conference or his speaking on social media afterwards, he did this move to try to go win. So I don't think it really affects too much of your top Chiefs fantasy assets. Like, I don't think it's really going to hurt Tyreek Hill. It's really not going to hurt Travis Kelsey. But Juju might not be the most effective fantasy wide receiver this year because he's going to have to fight for targets in that offense. I know that they put up a lot of points that works in his favor, but I don't love him in a fantasy aspect.
No, I'm right there with you. Juju, he probably won't be in my lineup. He's definitely going to get drafted. He'll be,
Mhm.
a guy that if Tyreek goes down, he'd have some instant success. He can kind of he's a different type of player, so I don't even really want to call him a handcuff, but he's one of those guys that you can rely on, so he's worth the bench spot, a weekly start if they're playing someone, or even like a guy like Travis Kelsey goes down, like he would get an uptick in targets then. Um, so he's definitely intriguing from that standpoint. Maybe some daily fantasy in the upcoming season as like a cheaper option if you're trying if it's a a prime matchup. But for regular fantasy, not like a great suit for him. Like it's probably going to turn out well because he'll probably look really good if he can stay healthy and then cash in big next year, which is I think why he ended up picking that as well instead of going back to like Pittsburgh because they have Mitch Trubisky, but let's be honest, Mitch Trubisky isn't Patrick Mahomes. The Allen Robinson, like I don't know if it's because I'm just like afraid to get duped by him again, like after last season, but he should be a guy that you can count on. We just talked about
Should
the
be.
Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson. I referenced the old Cooper Cup, Robert Woods. Like he should fit right in there nicely. He's still a talented receiver, um, but he's going to be a guy that I think is going to get underdrafted because of how bad he was for fantasy last year, and could end up being a guy that helps carry teams to the playoffs because the value for him will be so good.
That's true. And I think I also want to hit the brakes and see if they decide to come to a deal to Odell Beckham because Odell Beckham is still out there as a free agent. He would miss time to start the season, which is probably also why he's not signed anywhere yet. But that would change my mind too. I think if Odell Beckham decides to not go back to the Rams or the Rams decide not to re-sign him, um, Robinson gets an uptick. He should be drafted as like a flex receiver. He might be underdrafted, like you said, which is obviously what we're looking for. That'd be draft value right there. There's a chance you get duped, but there's a chance you get duped by any wide receiver out there. So I feel like you have to treat this one almost like we say don't draft for injuries. There's upside. Take the upside. But I like it better if Odell Beckham does not return. I'm gonna have to reevaluate if that we hear that signing happens.
I also think it's worth noting that, again, talking draft value with like a guy like Allen Robinson who struggled last year. Now he's going to a better offense. But if they do resign Odell Beckham Jr., he is definitely starting the season on PUP. So he is going to be out at least 6 weeks. It could be closer to 10 or 12. He tore his ACL in February. So, like, even 10 months from there will be December. Like, he could be out a long time. So if he, makes a recovery where he can come back in 8, weeks, Allen Robinson might have a really good start to the season and then turn into something that you can trade as you start to hear, oh, Odell Beckham's he's warming up. Like, let's go see what we can get there. So he could also be a part of a long strategy or, a strategy that works out if OBJ doesn't come back. So we'll have to reevaluate that one as we get closer and OBJ is no longer on the market. But before we get to guys to keep an eye on, we still have the running back position to talk about. Leonard Fournette, Rashad Penny, Cordarrelle Patterson, all signed with their same team. So I guess from a terms of fantasy, you don't have too much to take a look at. Rashad Penny, he was a championship league winner for how well he played the second half of the season without Russell Wilson there. If it's Drew Lock, how much do you really want to put trust in that? I know Chris Carson could potentially be back, but he had that neck injury, and those are always scary. But the bigger question for me, and I'm going to let George talk about it, is Cordarrelle Patterson, the guy I was never on board with all last offseason. I don't know if to trust him now that with Marcus Mariota. But George, what is your thoughts on Cordarrelle Patterson?
Patterson's a very interesting case because I think if he didn't have those last 4 weeks where he started to drop off, I'm thinking that we would be thinking of him really highly in this case. But now that he did, it always has to put that thought in the back of your mind: is he going to be able to last a full season? Was it all kind of a smokescreen? Was he playing above his potential? That was a career year, and then he's going to go back down to doing nothing. You don't really know. But as long as you don't overdraft him, if you're taking him as like that third running back off the board, if he does happen to fall that far, obviously it's early. We don't know how rankings are going to look. That's a good spot to take someone like a Cordarrelle Patterson. And if he happens to surprise you, that's fantastic. The biggest things that concern me are, the new quarterback. You don't have Matt Ryan there as kind of your, reliable thrower of the football. You have no wide receivers. Cordarrelle Patterson might even line up at wide receiver more this year because that was actually his natural position before they started using more at running back.
I think he's still technically on NFL.com, still a wide receiver. I know you said third
Yeah,
running back off the board, but isn't he still technically a wide receiver?
that's fair. It is. He is technically a wide receiver on NFL.com. He's a running back on my fantasy league, and he's like a split on
Yahoo and
Yahoo.
ESPN, I
He
think.
could be any.
He could be switched by the time the new season turns around. So but going off of last year, we now view him as a running back, but
Yeah.
his technical position is wide receiver.
So let's say flex or first bench guy. How about that?
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's not a bad way to look at him too. And I think, unlike Allen Robinson, I think he might get overdrafted. So he might be a guy you're avoiding because I'm not taking Cordarrelle Patterson in round 4. I'm just not. You won't convince me that he's going to be, unless they come out and say, and Arthur Smith, and still I will have a hard time say he'll be on the field for 90% of the snaps, and we want to get him 25 to 30 touches a game. If that comes out, okay, maybe I'll start looking around 4. But that's probably where he's going to go based on last year. Maybe he'll drop to 6 or 7, and then that's where the value starts to look in. But Cordarrelle Patterson will be an interesting name, interesting case study to follow, not just this offseason, but when we look back at fantasy and how players' careers trend and late risers and all that. But before we hop on last position group, tight ends, Austin Hooper to the Titans, Gerald Everett to the Chargers, OJ Howard to Buffalo. While you think of your thoughts, I'll give my quick thoughts.
okay.
OJ Howard, I really like the Buffalo signing. Dawson Knox, he did have a breakout year. Pay attention to if Josh Allen says he has Dawson Knox on his fantasy team or if he has OJ Howard, because whichever one I think would be the better option. But it does hurt. It's now a split back, no tight end system, and we'll have to see OJ Howard. I still think Knox is okay moving forward, but he's not like the tier 1 guy that you thought he might be if there was no other competition for him. But the one for me, Gerald Everett to the Chargers, I think makes a ton of sense.
I agree. The Chargers were trying to keep the band together, it seemed like, when they re-signed Mike Williams. They still have a couple other tight ends in that system that are decent, but Gerald Everett is an improved pass catcher over the other guys they've had at that position group. So I'm not saying go out there and take him in that top 4 tight ends. Definitely not. But he becomes a draftable tight end again, I think. even more than he was last year, in my opinion, because I like this Chargers offense as a fit for him more than I did with the Rams when I think that I don't know. I had bad feelings about him with the Rams. I don't know if that was just me. People were drafting him last year. He was all right.
Oh,
I think he
he was
could
with
take a
Seattle
step.
last year too.
Sorry, yeah, that's my
He
that's
was with
true.
the Rams. I know. I was just
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. Yeah, there was definitely I didn't really feel like the fit. I do like it. I mean, Jared Cook's no longer in Los Angeles. He had some startable weeks there. And I didn't mention this when we were talking about Devontae Adams, but I feel like I should.
Hmm.
One other rumbling I heard about, and it doesn't make sense to me at all based on what they've done for this offseason, but there has been some rumblings that the Chargers could be moving Keenan Allen. And again, I'm not just saying this as a Packers fan. Like I was listening to other podcasts, and they were like, "Hey, I saw you." Like somebody reached out to the guy because he tweeted out a list that would be ideal for the Packers, and Allen was like it, and they tweet out like, "What are you hearing? Stay on this. There's some actual truth to that." Again, that's just one source telling one source that I'm now telling you. So it could be nothing. It doesn't make sense. Like if the Chargers are going all in, why would you trade Keenan Allen? But
Exactly.
if they were to, that would only increase the Jared Everett tight end position. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But he's still an athletic tight end on a good offense, and that's what you're looking for out of tight ends after the big three, and the next like he's a tier 3 tight end, and they're all dartboard throws. We'll bring back the dartboard this season. And we're getting ready to move on to guys still available, but it is breaking news as we're coming out that not an offensive weapon that you care about for fantasy, but the Dolphins are signing left tackle Teron. Teron. Oh my god!
Tehran.
Thank you.
Got it.
I was like struggling. Armstead to a 5-year deal, upwards to $80 million. So a big signing for them. They definitely needed some offensive line help. I think that it can only help their running back backfield and Tua with some time. So just like a signing that doesn't make a direct impact on fantasy, but has some trickle down effects. But George, we have a whole list of guys here that I'm just going to rattle off real quick of veterans that are still available, and we can just talk about where we think the best fit with them to be where they want to go. Odell Beckham, I feel like we've covered him a decent amount with his injury. Jarvis Landry, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Will Fuller, Melvin Gordon, and Rob Gronkowski. Which guy do you want to talk about?
I'll take Jarvis Landry because I think a lot of people were counting out Jarvis Landry or kind of undervalued what he has been doing in the last few years. He was actually, as much as we didn't want to say it, a decent starting fantasy wide receiver at points last year. I know I was desperate in a league, and I mean, that team was not good, but Jarvis Landry was a flex for me for at least 3 weeks, and 2 of those weeks he put up over 10 points. So he's not going to be the difference making wide receiver one that you're used to Jarvis Landry and that name being. He's not going to quite be the PPR monster that he was when he was all the way down in Miami at the beginning of his career. But if he goes to the right fit, to a place that's going to give him some volume, keep an eye out as that late round flyer or that bench wide receiver that has some upside. And also a good ad for a team that may be wide receiver desperate. Like that would not be a bad move for the Packers to make.
Yeah, I will rebuttal a little bit. I do think Jarvis Landry's still good. I'm not 100% sure he's a good fit for the Packers because they have Randall Cobb, they have Alan Lazard, two guys that like to play in the slot. So I think they're looking for more of a boundary receiver. I thought the Bills would have been a really good fit for him, but they brought in Jamison Crowder, which we didn't talk about, but that is definitely a very underrated signing. I do like that fit a lot for them. But of our remaining list, to me, the two most intriguing names are Marquez Valdez-Scantling because of his age. He's a burner. He can take the top off any defense. And Will Fuller for the same thing. You know, he's his age. He has more of an injury history, but he can take the top off of any defense. He's still only 27 years old. I think with the right fit, you know, with Tua at quarterback, that was never going to be like a great fit for him. So I would love to see him, whether it's back in Cleveland with Desean, whether it's up in Green Bay with this, you know, he has a connection. He was at Notre Dame the same time Matt LaFleur was. They have been together. Like he would be a good fit for them. You know, there's some other teams out there that just need a speed like a good possession receiver. And don't forget that in 2020 he did end up getting suspended for the last 5 games, but he had over 800 yards and a handful of touchdowns in those 11 games. He was becoming a true number one wide receiver. So he intrigues me the most. I think he's going to have to take a 1-year deal, and there's he could turn out to be nothing, but as depending on where he goes, he's like a late round flyer with a lot of upside for me.
Definitely will be interesting to see. And I'm waiting for the news that Gronk's going to go back to Brady, but I
Oh,
think we both are
I
kind of waiting for that.
Yeah, he's either going to retire or go back to Brady at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody's going to Tampa Bay, but George, I mean, we've almost been talking an hour and we literally just went through the news that happened, in the last 6 days. So it's a crazy time in the NFL. We're just trying to keep you guys all updated with the latest, give you our thoughts and instant reactions. But as always, thank you for listening. Tyler will be back next week, but he'll have me say it for now. This podcast is more fun for you and more fun for us when you get involved.
Definitely is, Cody. Make sure you're checking out the couchgms.com and our Twitter page. We're keeping up to date on everything outside of the show here itself. Thank you guys one more time for listening in. For Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kerth. We'll see you all next week.